Alright, ladies and gentlemen, so in this particular video lesson, I want to take a look at what the Electoral College is, and start thinking about whether or not this is really an effective way to decide for president. So first, let's go ahead and use this map as an example. Of course, it's 2008. We'll see a little bit more modern ones in a second, but I think this one is a really good starting example. So first, what is the Electoral College? Well, the Electoral College is a system that was established in our Constitution, which of course means it's incredibly difficult to change. And it was established to decide the way in which we elect our president. So in presidential elections, the president that is ultimately elected, the person that's ultimately chosen, is based on whether or not they get the majority of the electoral votes. So each state essentially is given a certain amount of electoral votes. So in this, you can see up here that some of these states, a number of them have 3 votes for their state. We see New York has 31, Florida has 27, Texas 34, California has 55. And so in this system, each state has these votes that they ultimately cast in this election for president, and whichever president has the most of these electoral votes ultimately is chosen to be president. It's worth mentioning at this point that the Electoral College generally works under what is called a winner-takes-all system, which means that, like in California with our 55 votes, that if more than 50% of the citizens of our state decide that they vote for the Democratic Party's person, then all 55 votes go to that person. Even if 40% of the votes were for the Republican, if they did not get a majority, whatever the majority vote is gets all of those votes. Winner takes all. Whatever the majority in the state is gets all of those votes. I guess I'll jump in and say that not all states have that. Most states do, some don't. So you can see here with our buddy Nebraska, they have 5 votes altogether, but they do not have a winner-take-all system. So 1/5 of their votes ended up being for Democrats, so they still got one, but the majority went Republican. But California, we have winner-take-all, all the votes go. So that's sort of how it works, is the states have these votes. For the most part, they have winner take all. Each state casts all of their votes in this election. Whoever gets the majority ultimately wins. And based on the number of votes that there are, just to let you know, 270, so that's 270. 270 is the magic number in order to get a majority in the Electoral College. But how do we decide which state gets which votes? Well, pretty simply, they're just based on the number of people in the Senate and in the House of Representatives for that state put together. That's it. That's what it is. So California has 53 members of the House of Representatives, and we have 2 senators because every state has 2 senators. Therefore, we have 55 electoral votes. So you'll see some of these only have 3. That generally means these states have very little population because they get 2 votes for 2 senators, because every state gets those 2, and then they only have 1 member of the House of Representatives. So added together, they only get 3. So that's generally how they decide the numbers. So in this particular election, of course, this was 2008, which of course we know now. Obama won this election, and this was the way that the electoral map looked for that election process at the end of it. So all the states that are blue ended up casting their votes to the Democratic nominee, which was Obama. All the ones that are red ended up casting their votes for the Republican nominee, which was McCain. But ultimately Obama won. But what makes this interesting is you'll notice that it sort of looks like over 50% of the states themselves voted for McCain, right? Like there's more red on this map than there is blue. But the deal is that Obama just happens to win the Electoral College game, which means that he managed to get majorities in the more populous states, like New York, Florida, California, and he managed to get all of those huge number count votes in order to push into past the 270 point. So really, what ultimately happens then is sometimes in some ways the Electoral College makes the election process less about trying to win the majority vote of all of the citizens and more about how to make sure that you have a smart strategy to manipulate this Electoral College game to make it so that you sort of get what you want. So let's jump into the 2012 election map. So that's this here. And you can see here that in the 2012, this happened a little bit earlier in the election. And what was cool about this map, and that we'll be taking a look at a number of maps this year, is this one was originally used just to make estimates about where they thought each state would vote. So of course, here's the thing that's reminding us that we need 270. So all the red states here were ones that they anticipated would be likely GOP votes. And the blue states were likely Obama votes. And then we still had all these green states, which at the time were toss-ups. We didn't know which direction they were going to go. So ultimately we do now, obviously, because we know that Obama ended up winning this particular election. But at the time, there's still a number of states in the country that we didn't know what to do, which means, and it's important to mention, that there are a number of states within our country that are considered safe states. So California, for example, is considered a safe Democratic state. That means that 9 times out of 10, they can be pretty reliable. California can pretty reliably be counted on to have a Democrat majority. That most people will vote for Democrat in California. It's considered a safe state. And this in large part is because of San Francisco, of course. All the people in San Francisco tend to be a little bit more liberal, and in LA, which tends to be a little bit more liberal. So all of those people in those areas tends to make California a safe state. But there are places like Florida in this particular election, which was a toss-up. We didn't really know which way they were going to go. We didn't really know which way Iowa was going to go. We didn't really know which way Pennsylvania was going to go at this point. Making them battleground states is what they're called, which sounds a little bit more intense than it potentially actually is. Nobody's actually battling unless you consider that maybe people get so angry at all of the ridiculous campaign spending that happens specifically in these battleground states that maybe having to look at just campaign commercial after campaign commercial makes them want to go in the streets and fight people, but probably not. So again, safe states, they don't actually get a lot of campaign advertisements, generally considered to be Democrats, but we still get some, right? Think of all the campaign commercials that you see on a daily basis and imagine that you see almost zero compared to some of these other toss-up states. So anyway, let's jump into how it looks now. So at this point, there are different websites that you can go to. Here's one right here. This is on Real Clear Politics. There are a number of others that are at this state also taking a look at the what we think the Electoral College game will look like in the current election. So right here, this one, since we're still early enough that it's a lot of guesswork, we're not really sure where it's going to go. But you can see here that the really dark states are the ones that we are pretty confident are definitely going to go Democrat. As they get a little bit lighter blue, they are a little bit less guaranteed to go that way. And gray is a toss-up. Gray is our battleground states here. We're not sure what those are going to do yet. And as we look at the really dark red, those are pretty much guaranteed to go Trump. A little bit lighter red are a little bit less guaranteed. But at this point, we kind of use these covers to give ourselves an idea of where we think that the voting will go. And of course, as things change, as more polls come in, this stuff will change. But this is sort of where we're looking right now as of, what's the date? So Saturday, August 27th. As of August 27th, this is kind of what we're looking at. And we'll, of course, in class continue to take a look at this and kind of see the way that goes.